The morning came quiet over the mountains, a soft gold spilling through the pines, mist curling like ghosts between the ridges. The cabin at the valley's edge breathed thin plumes of smoke into the sky, a lonely signal that a man still lived there. His name was Elias Boone. The townsfolk called him the Sterile Smith, a cruel title that clung to him long after he'd left town and the life he once tried to build there. He sat on his porch that morning, sharpening a dull axe, the rhythm steady as a heartbeat. Every scrape against the whetstone seemed to echo through the stillness. His eyes, worn and gray, followed the fog drifting across the creek, the same creek where he'd once cooled iron, back when he believed he'd forge his name into something lasting. But that was before the doctor's verdict, before the whispers, before he decided that silence was kinder than pity. They said the bloodline ends with me, he murmured to the trees. Maybe that's how it ought to be. A hawk circled above, and the mountains groaned faintly in the cold. He poured coffee into a tin cup, held it between scarred hands, and let the steam rise against his beard. Out here, nothing asked him to prove his worth. Out here, the ache in his chest could fade into the hum of wind through pine needles. By noon, the storm began to build, thunder crawling like distant hoofbeats. Elias went down to check his traps when he heard it, the frantic neighing of a horse, the scream of wooden wheels splitting against rock. He ran, boots slipping through mud, until he saw a wagon tipped into the gully. A mule lay dead beside it, harness tangled. And there, half buried in wet earth, was a woman, her dress torn, hair plastered to her face, one arm shielding her stomach. Elias slid down the slope, heart pounding with something sharper than fear. He brushed the mud from her cheek. "Ma'am, you hear me?" Her eyelids fluttered. My name's Clara Whitlow." Her voice was a trembling whisper, carried off by the wind. He lifted her into his arms and carried her toward his cabin, her weight light, but her breath heavy and shallow. Inside, the fire was dying. He rekindled it with trembling hands, boiled water, cleaned her wounds. She stirred as he dabbed her forehead with a rag. "You shouldn't have helped me," she whispered, voice hoarse. "Wasn't planning to," he said quietly, "but the storm made the decision for me." Outside, rain hammered the earth until the valley became a mirror of silver water. Days passed before she could stand. The river had flooded, cutting off every path to town. Clara tried to leave twice, but the swollen creek stopped her both times. Her pride was stiff, but exhaustion gentled her resistance. So she stayed. She mended his curtains with neat, trembling stitches. He patched her boots in return. They ate in silence, venison stew, black coffee, hard bread, until the quiet between them softened into something bearable. Word of her disappearance must have reached town, because riders began appearing on the ridge, one by one, only to turn back once the flood swallowed the road. Soon the gossip spread like wildfire. The widow Whitlow, shacked up with the Barren mountain man. The laughter of it reached even this far, in echoes carried by wind. At night, Elias sat by the hearth, eyes lost in the fire. He heard those old words again, from the doctor from his past. "You're sterile, Boone. There's no fixing what's missing." And she too carried ghosts. One evening, while sewing by candlelight, she spoke into the stillness. "My husband, before he died, he told me I'd never bear life, that I was too weak for it. He looked up from a knife he was whittling. He was wrong." She smiled faintly. "And if he wasn't?" Elias turned his gaze to the flames. "Then the world's crueler than I thought." The silence that followed wasn't cold. It was something deeper, the kind that holds two souls who've both been broken, sitting side by side at the edge of what's left. The days grew longer. The storm eased. They began to find rhythm, a quiet partnership built of chores and wordless care. She hung herbs to dry by the window. He taught her to set traps along the creek. They traded lessons without pride, without expectation. Once while fixing a fence, she brushed soot from his cheek, just a fleeting touch. He froze, not in fear, but disbelief, that someone might touch him gently again. Her eyes met his, warm as summer rain. And for the first time in years, Elias felt something flicker alive inside his chest. "You work too hard," she said softly. "Work's all that listens," he answered. "I'm listening," she whispered. That night, he couldn't sleep. He lay awake, staring at the ceiling's dark rain, the faint scent of lavender from her corner of the room filling the air. He wanted to thank her for being there, but gratitude felt too small a word. Weeks passed. Spring thunder returned. Then, one moonless night, the dogs began barking. The smell of smoke cut through the wind. Elias grabbed his rifle and stepped outside, shadows moving through the tree-line. Drifters! He shouted a warning. Gunfire split the quiet. The cabin's window shattered. Clara screamed. He pushed her behind the table, firing back, sparks lighting the doorway. One bullet grazed his arm. Another thudded into the beam above him. When one of the raiders kicked the door open, Elias swung the iron poker hard. The man fell. But another torch flew through the window, catching the curtains. Flames clawed up the walls. Smoke filled the room. Elias coughed, staggering as the fire spread. Clara tried to drag him out, but he pushed her toward the door first. Go! She refused. Her hands gripped his coat. Not without you. He stumbled, coughing hard, eyes watering, until the roof groaned and a beam collapsed nearby. Clara screamed his name, dragging him through the smoke toward the cold air outside. They fell together into the mud, the cabin blazing behind them, their faces streaked with ash and tears. He blinked awake at dawn to find her beside him, her hand resting over his heart. The cabin was half gone. Only the chimney and a few blackened beams remained. Smoke curled upward, silent as prayer. You saved me, he rasped. You said you had nothing left to give, she whispered. But you gave me my life back. He turned to her, eyes glassy with exhaustion and something deeper, something he hadn't dared to feel in years. Behind them, the ashes smoldered, glowing like dying stars. Before them, the first light of morning touched the valley, tender and bright. For a long time, neither spoke. Then, slowly, her hand slipped into his. And for the first time since he'd been called sterile, Elias Boone felt the pulse of something living. Not beneath his skin, but between two souls who had finally found each other in the ruins. The snows came early that year, settling over the mountains like a white hush. Smoke again rose from Elias Boone's chimney, thinner this time, from a rebuilt hearth and a roof patched by hand. The land that once felt haunted now carried the faint scent of bread, wood smoke, and something almost like peace. Clara May Whitlow had not left after the fire. She stayed, even when the flood receded and the road to town opened again. Folks whispered that she was trapped by pity or madness, or both, but those who spoke never saw the look she gave Elias when he limped in from the cold each night, or how he looked at her, as though afraid she might vanish if he blinked too long. The days found rhythm again. He chopped wood, mended traps, and whittled in silence while she hummed by the stove. It wasn't love the way stories tell it. It was smaller, quieter, built from habits that made the silence feel safe. Then one morning, she dropped the kettle. It clanged, steam spilling across the floor. Elias rushed over. She was pale, shaking, clutching her middle. For days after, she could hardly keep food down. When Martha Dole's wagon appeared on the trail, carrying her gossiping smile and bundles of herbs, Clara already knew what the old woman would say. Well, I'll be damned, Martha said, eyes narrowing with false pity. Seems the Barren man's gone and found himself a miracle. Elias froze. The world went still. He looked from Martha's smirk to Clara's trembling hands resting over her belly. It's true, he asked, voice cracking like dry timber. She nodded once, barely breathing. The midwife says I'm with child. He took a step back, the room shrinking around him. It can't be mine, he said quietly. Doctor told me long ago. There's nothing left to give. Her eyes softened. Then maybe heaven didn't listen. The words struck deeper than any insult he'd ever heard. Hope, that cruel, shimmering thing, rose up inside him like a flame he wanted to smother. He turned and walked out into the snow, his boots crunching down the hill until the cabin was just a thin trail of smoke behind him. For days, he worked in the woods, splitting logs until his hands split too, until his body screamed loud enough to drown the thoughts. The cold bit his skin. The wind carried whispers from town. She lied. She found another man. Elias Boone's been made a fool again. But every night, when he stumbled home with his shirt stiff from sweat and frost, she was there, waiting with soup and silence. She never asked him to speak, and he never did. Winter deepened. The valley turned white and still. Then, one gray morning, a rider appeared, Sheriff Tom Harlan. He dismounted, stamping snow from his coat, face rough with concern. "Elias," he said, "you've heard what they're saying in town. That she tricked you. That the twins." "Twins?" Elias interrupted. "That's what Martha claims." "Two heartbeats," she said. Elias stared at the ground. "You come all this way to spread gossip, Sheriff." "No. I came because sometimes gossip gets folks killed out here." There was pity in Harlan's voice, and that made it worse. Elias's jaw tightened. "You got proof of sin, Sheriff." "Only talk," Harlan sighed. "But out here, talk's as good as scripture." When the sheriff left, the snow fell harder. Elias walked back inside and found Clara sitting near the fire, mending a torn blanket. She looked up, eyes glassy but steady. "He came about me?" she asked. "He came about us." The fire crackled between them, its light painting gold across her swollen belly. He sank to his knees in front of her. For the first time, he didn't hide the tremor in his hands. "I wanted to be strong enough to protect you," he whispered. "But all I've done is make you stand alone." She reached for him, fingers tracing the scars on his jaw. "You gave me shelter when no one else would. You've already been a father. You just didn't know it yet." For a long moment, he couldn't speak. His breath came uneven. Then he leaned forward, resting his forehead against her knees. Outside, the storm gathered again, wind howling like some old spirit circling the valley. Weeks later, as night swallowed the mountains, the blizzard arrived, fierce and endless. The world turned white and blind. Inside the cabin, Clara cried out, her body racked with pain. The babies were coming too soon. Elias panicked, fumbling with blankets and boiling water. "Hold on," he begged. "Just hold on." Lightning flashed through the window. The storm roared, drowning her screams. He prayed aloud. The first time in years his voice cracked toward heaven. "Lord, if you ever owed me a miracle, let it be now." Hours stretched like days. She bled and trembled, biting back pain as he held her hand, whispering every promise he could think of. The fire dimmed. The storm howled. Then a cry. Small, sharp, alive. A second followed, softer, like an echo. Clara collapsed back, sobbing with exhaustion. Elias stared at what lay in his trembling hands. Two tiny, red-faced infants, wailing in the light of a dying fire. His chest tightened until tears blurred his vision. "I thought my blood was dead," he whispered. "It wasn't blood that made them," she breathed weakly, eyes half closed. "It was love you didn't know you still had." He pressed his forehead against hers. Laughter and tears tangled together. Outside, the storm began to ease. Snowflakes drifted past the window like feathers. The world, for the first time in a long while, felt clean again. By dawn, the sky opened to gold. Smoke rose from the chimney, curling into air, so cold it glittered. Elias stepped outside, barefoot in the snow, two swaddled bundles in his arms. He looked out over the mountains that had once been his prison and now felt like his witness. "The mountains took everything from me," he murmured. "But they gave it back, not in the way I wanted, but in the way I needed." Behind him, Clara stood in the doorway, pale but smiling. The twins stirred, their tiny breaths fogging the morning air. He turned toward her, the light catching the tears in his beard. She met his eyes, and for a heartbeat, the world seemed to hold still. Somewhere in the distance, the church bell rang from town, faint and sweet. The wind carried it over the snow, over the silence, over all that had been broken. "Maybe that's what life does out here," his voice said softly, as though telling the story years later. "Breaks a man down, then builds him again with gentler hands. We don't choose our miracles. They come quiet, wrapped in blankets, breathing the cold mountain air, reminding us that even the barren earth can bloom again." The camera of memory pulls back, the cabin small against the vastness of the valley, two figures framed by gold morning light, and the faint laughter of newborns carried into the wind. Fade to white.